Hi, I'm Droolbatz. It's so nice to see you. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 2009 horror movie, The Uninvited. I'm going to be discussing it based on its premise, its production value and artistic choices, and finally, how it compares or contrasts to other films of the genre. I hope you enjoy. This young girl, probably 15 or 16, is in a mental institution after the tragic and haunting death of her mother. She doesn't really remember the event so much because it was traumatic, but she's been having these really weird dreams, and her therapist is helping her sort it out. She's really excited because she finally gets to go home and be with her family again. She's probably been in there for like 1 or 2 months, a summer length. However, unfortunately for her, when she gets home, she discovers that her father has moved on very quickly from her mother. Her mother had had cancer, and there had been a nurse hired to stay with her mother and kind of like live in with them and help out. Well, her mom died, and her dad is already dating the girlfriend. The girlfriend is already living with them. This nurse who was there when her mother died. Now, that is a lot to swallow for this girl. As the girl tries to get to know the nurse more, of course she's biased. She doesn't want to get to know this woman who is replacing her mom. She starts to notice some really suspicious things about the circumstances under which her mother died. She also begins to notice some really suspicious things about her nurse's past. For example, when she and her sister try to look up the nurse, her name's not in the system. They think that this nurse is after her dad's money. The girl starts to see these scary and haunting images, strange, scary creatures crawling towards her, and then she sees a vision of her mom, especially when she goes near the boathouse where her mother passed away. These visions are haunting her, and certainly they're not haunting her without reason. They are trying to tell her something, and she's here to find out what. She starts to believe that the nurse killed her mother on purpose to get to their dad. But how can she prove that? It all comes down to beating the clock. She has to find evidence to prove that this nurse is sinister and take it to the police before the nurse learns that she is doing this and stops her. The movie opens with detailed first-person narration that creates a rich, sensual atmosphere and is also a really good introduction to our main character. The rest of the movie builds with this really rich and satisfying atmosphere. You get to see a lot of the setting. They're on some kind of little island. I'm not sure where it is. There's clearly a mainland, and then the little island where they live, they get their groceries delivered by boat. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be in Washington or on the East Coast somewhere or what. The world building is really rich. You get to see a lot of the house. You get to see a lot of the countryside. It's just very satisfying in that way. The movie's visuals contributed heavily to the rich and foreboding atmosphere. The color palette was subtle but varied, and there were a lot of really interesting camera angles, a lot of like short and long shots, and the special effects were really excellent. The scares were very suspenseful and foreboding, and altogether the movie had a really tense and fascinating feel. Unfortunately, there were some elements that drew me out of that satisfying atmosphere. I bumped the shelf. For example, the sounds in the movie, the soundscaping skewed really soft. That made it hard to enjoy because the main girl, she spoke really softly, and a lot of the movie was, rather than like a screaming, scary image coming at you, it was like, the nurse like whispering softly like, "Do you really want to do that?" And things like that. Because it was so soft, it was a little bit hard to hear. You'll have to turn the volume up if you watch this, but it's not a deal breaker for me. The movie had some really cool visuals that helped it stand out, not just in like the camera work, but just some of the actual visual tropes on screen. For example, there's a scene where the girl is like seeing like a vision or a memory of like a glass of water falling, and when it shatters, the water instantly becomes blood. It's so seamless, it's so distinctive. It was a very memorable small moment, and the movie is just full of them. I was really fascinated and found myself just actively watching this movie. The concept of a very self-possessed and foreboding new influence, whether it's like a neighbor or like a new parent, who kind of like has sinister intentions seemingly, is a very, very common trope, but it's common in like a classic way. It's very easy to use a simple formula and then make it your own. This movie definitely did. It's a very familiar, flexible premise, but there's a reason people always come back for more. Just familiar and classic in that way. Altogether, this movie had a very rich atmosphere that was very enveloping. Some familiar faces added a lot of star power to it, and also some really high quality acting, and a lot of what went on was fairly believable. Now I'm going to be discussing how this movie stands apart from or blends into other films of the genre. I'm going to be spoiling this movie, so if you don't want to see the ending from me, go out and watch it yourself. Please leave now. It was lovely to have you. Please like and subscribe before you leave. I'll see you on another horror movie review. Okay, so for the rest of you peeps who are sticking around, this girl discovers that her dad is actually engaged to the nurse, and he was hesitating to tell her because he was waiting for her to calm down. She knows that the clock is ticking and she has to find this evidence. However, she's still being visited by the scary images and ghosts creatures that she thinks is like perhaps her mom communicating with her. And she starts to see weird ghosts of like children around. It's obviously quite scary and alarming, and every time she tries to bring it up to her dad, he's very dismissive of her and's like, you know, the whole "you're crazy, so I'm not gonna listen to what you say" type of thing. She does a lot of research, discovers that the nurse's name is not in any databases, and there were 3 children who were murdered and found in like a shallow grave by their nanny, who was trying to seduce their father or whatever, and she vanished mysteriously without a trace. The girl notices that the nurse is wearing a string of pearls that look exactly like the pearls in the photograph of the 3 murdered children's mother. She knows she has to get these pearls to the police to prove her point, but the nurse knows exactly what she's doing, and a huge battle ensues. The nurse tries to tranquilize her with this giant set of tranquilizers that the girls had earlier found in her drawers, and things get a little bit violent. Our main girl passes out, and when she wakes up, she finds a trail of blood. She is so afraid that the nurse has killed her sister, but when she follows the trail of blood to this dumpster outside their house, she finds instead the nurse's body stuffed into the dumpster, and her sister appears and says, "We had to do it this way. You know, it was the only way. She made us." As she's trying to piece together what's happening, her dad pulls up in a car and is like, "Oh my gosh, what have you done?" And she said, Dad, we had to. You weren't listening. She did all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. You know, she was trying to hurt Alex, my sister." And he goes, "Your sister Alex has been dead for a long time." What? It turns out her sister died in the same fire that her mother did. It turns out that she found her father was in fact cheating on her sickly mother with this nurse, and in a rage she went to go light some of the nurse's stuff on fire with some gasoline. However, she left the gas in the boathouse on, and it blew up when her sister and her mother were inside. She blacked out the memory and was, I guess, so traumatized she just forgot about it. It turns out the nurse had changed her name because she had a really abusive ex-boyfriend who was trying to hurt her really bad, and while she did cheat with the dad, she was genuinely, I guess, trying to reach out. The girl is sent back to her mental institution after all this damage has been caused, and it's discovered that this weird older woman who is kind of her friend, kind of a weird influence on her, is the lady, the nanny, who murdered those children. This movie was fairly cliche, but it was still fun. Where it fell flat was the way that it had the whole "it was just in your head" type of thing. Now, the whole "you just imagined it" trope is not particularly unique. For it to be well done, the story has to be really, really specifically well constructed up until that very moment. Some people will be able to doubt, but generally the editing has to be very tight, as does the writing. This movie kind of failed in that way. For example, there were some foreshadowing moments, I guess, where it's implied that her sister is not there. For example, her sister shows up wearing the same exact outfit that she is wearing at one point. This like white dress that's kind of like a symbolic motion. There are a couple of scenes where the girl is talking to her sister, and it could be easily implied that, you know, with retrospect knowledge, you'll realize that she's just talking to herself. But there is a scene where the girl is not present, and it shows the sister talking to her dad, kind of confronting him like, oh, you know, you kept, you know, I was trying to send her letters and you kept them from going to her in the mental institution. Is it because you didn't want her to learn about your new girlfriend? And that kind of a thing. The girl was not present for that, so how could she have hallucinated her sister saying that? One could argue that she imagined the whole thing, but that seems really unlikely nonetheless. The editing of this movie was fine, but the writing, the way that the scenes were set up like that, didn't actually lead to a plausible, it was all in your head type of thing. Another movie that has done this really well is, I think, is probably the modern classic of this example, The Sixth Sense. Bruce Willis is helping a little boy who sees ghosts, and it turns out he is a ghost. That, of course, is kind of the classic example. That movie's really well done, though. They edited it in a really specific way so that you could argue that it was really all in his head that he is a ghost. Of course, because that movie has been spoiled for so many people, a lot of us can see it coming. This movie, it's not quite the same. It's a lot harder to see it coming, especially because certain elements of it were not edited so tightly and written so well, if that makes sense. So this movie came out in 2009. It was probably filmed a year or two before that, and it does feel a little bit dated. The main girl has these really big kind of like emo side bangs. She and her sister dress in very like mid-2000s looks. While it does date the film a little bit, it kind of adds like a pleasant nostalgia for people who are, you know, thinking fondly of the days when Gossip Girl was on TV and things such as that. If I had to rate this movie, I would give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a cliche but really fun movie, very nostalgic. I think that it was definitely a fun and satisfying watch, but there were just a couple elements too many for it to be a cohesive and clear story, and it did feel like there were a couple of just really extraneous things in there that didn't need to be in there. Because the whole it's just in your head thing has to be done a really specific way for it to be successful, and it really wasn't quite done that well in this movie, and it fell flat. I have to not give it as good a score. It's still a really fun movie, though. The scary elements were well spaced. It was a very foreboding and satisfying film in that way, and it was just really atmospheric. So while the plot was not as good, and it was a little cliche and a little bit dated, it was just a really fun movie, and very worth your time, I would say. I would love to hear what you have to say, though. Do you like their mid-2000s fashion? Did you see the ending coming? Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this review was helpful to you, and I hope you have a great evening, or morning, or midnight, or afternoon, or whatever you're doing. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you liked it, and please consider subscribing. I do make horror reviews on this channel, and it'd really make me happy if you subscribed. Alright, thank you so much. Bye.